Picture a ballroom. Now fill it with 300 people and none of them are saying a word that matters. The men are talking loudly about horses, about Parliament, about the price of cotton and the disgrace of so-and-so's eldest son, and whether Bonaparte could have won at Waterloo if he'd had a decent night's sleep. The men are talking the way men in 1823 talk, openly, freely, with no particular fear that their words will be used against them. But the women are doing something else entirely. A woman across the room raises her fan to her lips and holds it there for exactly 3 seconds. Another woman catches this and angles her closed parasol to the left. A third woman, not looking at either of them, runs the edge of her glove along her jaw, and the first woman, satisfied, allows herself a small nod and returns to watching the dancing. An entire conversation just happened. Nobody noticed. Nobody was supposed to notice. Now let me tell you something that will make your skin crawl slightly. This wasn't a parlour trick. This wasn't flirting. This wasn't idle social theatre invented by bored women with too much time and too many accessories. This was survival. This was a system of communication so elaborate, so deeply encoded, so thoroughly distributed across every object a woman was permitted to carry in public. Her fan, her gloves, her flowers, her handkerchief, her parasol, the angle of her head, the colour of her dress, the bend of a calling card corner, the specific flower pinned to her bodice, the particular knot in her embroidery thread, that it constituted a second language, a living, breathing language with grammar and vocabulary and regional dialects and slang, a language that men, almost without exception, could not read. And tonight, we're going to learn it. We're going back to London. Not Georgian London with its executions and its gin epidemic and its overcrowded streets. This London is slightly more refined on the surface. It's Regency London, 1823. The king is George IV, which tells you something right away about the character of the era. This is a man who spent approximately 40 years as Prince Regent, waiting for his own life to begin, and when it finally did, he responded by eating himself into illness and spending more money on clothes than most men earn in a lifetime. Everything is slightly performative, everything is slightly theatrical, and everything that actually matters is happening in the spaces between words. We're living it tonight, 1 year, 1 woman, everything she would have seen, touched, learned, and survived. So I make these history stories, and I should tell you up front that this one has been in my head for a long time, because most of history, most recorded history, most of what ends up in textbooks and documentaries and podcasts about old dead people, it's what men were doing publicly, loudly, in ways that got written down. But women were there too. Women were always there, and they were doing things. Complex, deliberate, intelligent things. They were just doing them quietly, in a language that most historians didn't bother to learn. That's what this is about. Get comfortable. Here we go. The smell hits you before anything else. Coal smoke and lavender water, which sounds like a contradiction. But in London in 1823 it is the smell of the middling-class household, the aspiring household, the household that burns coal because it can afford coal, but burns it in drafty fireplaces that only half work, and compensates by spraying lavender water on everything it owns to mask the evidence. You're lying on a narrow bed in a narrow room at the top of a tall house on Gracechurch Street, in the ward of Candlewick, in the city of London proper, 4 minutes' walk from the Monument and 20 minutes' walk from St. Paul's Cathedral, and what feels like approximately 1,000 miles from the village in Yorkshire where you grew up. The room is called the servants' attic, which is an optimistic name for what is actually a wedge of space where the roof slants down so sharply that you can only stand upright in the middle. The ceiling above your bed is maybe 14 inches from your face when you lie flat. In the winter, frost forms on the inside of the walls. But that's winter. It's April now. The frost is gone. What's left behind is a faint smell of damp plaster and the persistent ghost of the previous occupant, a woman named Judith who left this position 6 months ago under circumstances that nobody has fully explained to you, which lingers in the mattress stuffing and the corner of the room where she kept her things. Your name is Agnes Hartley. You're 17 years old. You arrived here 8 months ago with a letter of introduction, a bundle of clothes, and the specific, precise fear of a girl who has never been further than 10 miles from home, suddenly standing in the middle of the biggest city in the world. Your mother pressed the letter into your hands at the wagon stop. "Mrs. Ashworth is quality," she said. "She'll treat you fair if you work hard and keep your eyes down." Your mother meant the second part as reassurance. You've since realized it was a warning. The bell rings at 6 in the morning. Not an alarm bell, not a church bell, though there are plenty of those too. London in 1823 is still a city of church bells, dozens of them, each one calling to each other across the rooftops in a language that sounds like controlled chaos until you've heard it long enough to pick out individual voices. St. Edmund the King is closest. Its bell has a slight flat note, like it was cast on a bad day. You've learned to recognize it the way you'd recognize a neighbor's cough. The bell that wakes you is the small brass bell that Mrs. Diver, the housekeeper, rings at the bottom of the servants' stairs every morning at 6 on the dot. She's been ringing it every morning for 11 years, which means she has rung it approximately 4,000 times, which means the sound of it has been worn into your nervous system in the 8 months you've been here, to the point where you're usually awake and sitting up before the second ring finishes. Your hands are cold. They're always cold in the morning. In the 8 months you've worked as lady's maid to Mrs. Catherine Ashworth, your hands have become a source of private anxiety. Ladies' maids are supposed to have soft hands, careful hands, hands capable of doing hair and fastening buttons and pressing lace without snagging it. But you have a Yorkshire girl's hands. You grew up helping your mother in the garden and your father in the barn. You have hands that have shelled peas and hauled water and wrung out laundry in the freezing months. You've been rubbing them with beeswax and almond oil every night for 8 months. They are slightly better. You get up in the dark because the only window faces north and gets no morning light, and you dress by feel. You know where everything is. You've memorized the topography of this small slanted space the way you used to memorize the paths around home. Not by thinking about them, but by having moved through them so many times that your body knows. Your dress is a plain dark blue, which is the colour that marks you as a lady's maid rather than a housemaid. The housemaids wear grey. The cook wears brown. Mrs. Diver wears black, which is the colour of authority, and also the colour of someone who has given up on the possibility of being perceived as anything other than formidable. Appearances matter in this house. They matter in a very specific way that took you several months to begin to understand. You make your way down the servants' stairs, narrow, uncarpeted, with a 6th step that creaks unless you step on the far left edge, and into the kitchen. The smell changes immediately. Coal burning hot now. Yesterday's bread, slightly stale. The iron smell of the range, which has been lit since 5 by the scullery, maid. The faint, sweet, sour smell of the milk that came up from the dairy at dawn, and something else underneath all of it, this smell of boiling starch. That smell means one thing. It means Mrs. Ashworth has an event today, which means something requires pressing, which means your morning is already spoken for. Cook looks up from the range and nods at you. She's already making breakfast for the family. The kitchen is dense with heat and motion. She's got her morning at home today, Cook says, and the musical evening at the Pembrokes tonight. This is more information than Cook is technically required to give you, but Cook, whose actual name is Margaret Fielding, though nobody in the house uses it, has been here for 12 years and has an accurate read on everyone who has ever passed through. She decided 2 months in that you were not completely hopeless, and since then has treated you to brief, accurate bulletins about the day's requirements. Morning at home means Mrs. Ashworth will receive visitors between 10 and noon, which means she needs to be dressed and arranged by 9:30, which means you need to have her hair done by 9, which means you need to have her clothes pressed, aired and assembled by 8:30. It is currently 6:15. You eat standing up, a piece of bread and a cup of small beer, because there is no time to sit, and because sitting down while the range fire is crackling and the starch is boiling and the day is already in motion would feel like a kind of surrender. Mrs. Catherine Ashworth is 34 years old. She's the wife of Mr. Thomas Ashworth, who made his money in textile importing, specifically Indian cotton, which has made a great many men in London quite wealthy over the past 20 years, and which has also funded the ongoing systematic destruction of Indian weavers' livelihoods. But this is not something that comes up in polite conversation. Mrs. Ashworth is what you would describe, if you were being diplomatic, as accomplished. She has been educated in music, French, drawing, and dancing. She speaks correctly, dresses beautifully, manages her household efficiently, and maintains a social calendar that, from where you stand, looks like a military operation. What she is not, and you sense this within your first week and have had confirmed by months of close proximity, is particularly happy. This is not a dramatic unhappiness. She doesn't weep. She doesn't rage. She is not, as far as you can tell, cruelly treated by her husband, who is largely absent at his counting house and his club, and seems to regard his wife the way he regards his good furniture, valuable, well-maintained, and not something he gives much thought to unless it shows signs of needing repair. It's more of a contained unhappiness, a settled dissatisfaction. The unhappiness of someone who has done everything correctly and received in return a life that fits like a dress made by someone who took their measurements over the clothing rather than under it, technically accurate, slightly off, mildly uncomfortable in ways difficult to name. You know about this unhappiness partly because you are perceptive, which is something nobody in this household has commented on because perceptiveness in servants is considered either irrelevant or vaguely threatening, and partly because it is your job, quite literally your professional function, to be close to Mrs. Ashworth, to know her body's rhythms, to recognise from the set of her shoulders whether her head is aching, to understand from the quality of her silence whether she wants to talk or whether she wants to be wordlessly, skillfully attended to. You have gotten good at this. What you have not yet gotten good at, what you're only beginning to understand 8 months in, is the larger language, the one that doesn't operate in the space between you and your mistress alone, but in the space between every woman in this social world, the language that has been invisible to you, that you've been moving through like a fish unaware of water, that is all around you every single day. That's what today is going to begin to teach you. Mary Tanner has been a lady's maid for 11 years. She works for Mrs. Augusta Pembroke, which means she works for the woman who is hosting tonight's musical evening, which means the two of you move in overlapping orbits, at shared events, at the twice-weekly deliveries when the two households exchange small parcels and messages, and occasionally at the quiet spaces between morning and afternoon when the ladies are otherwise occupied and the maids have half an hour to themselves. Mary Tanner is 28. She has dark hair and a quick, watchful face, and hands that are the softest you've ever touched on a working woman. She noticed you 3 months into your time at Gracechurch Street in the way that experienced people sometimes notice the inexperienced, with a kind of patient exasperation that is the precursor to actual help. "You're watching her wrong," she told you once in the back passage behind the Pembroke house, both of you waiting for your respective mistresses to finish a long afternoon call. "I beg your pardon?" "Mrs. Ashworth." She said it without elaboration, like a diagnosis. "I don't understand." "I know." She looked at you with the expression of someone about to explain something obvious. "You're watching what she says. You should be watching what she does." That was 3 months ago, and you've been trying to understand it ever since. Today, with the morning at home starting in less than 3 hours, you finally get to ask her what she meant. Mrs. Ashworth's dressing room is a room about 12 feet square. It has a window overlooking the back garden, a small, neatly kept strip of London garden with an apple tree that produces tiny bitter apples in September, and a dressing table that takes up most of one wall, and a wardrobe of dark wood that holds her clothes organised by occasion and season. The smell in here is different from the rest of the house. It's warmer, more personal. Rose water and the faint astringency of the face wash she uses, and the particular warm fabric smell of clothes that have been worn and aired and worn again. The smell of a woman's private space, which is different from every other smell in a house occupied by both men and women. You're pressing her morning call dress, a pale green silk with a white lace ruff at the neck, when she comes in at 7:30, already half awake in her dressing gown. She sits at the dressing table without speaking. This is normal. Mrs. Ashworth is not a morning talker. She sits and lets herself be attended to, and you have learned to read the quality of this silence, whether it is peaceful or restless, whether it wants music. She keeps a small musical box on the dressing table, and sometimes winds it herself, and sometimes glances at it in a way that means she wants you to wind it, or just the ordinary quiet sounds of the morning routine. This morning's silence is tightly wound. There is something in the line of her spine. You begin unpinning her hair from its nighttime arrangement. Her hair is dark, almost black, and thick, and doing it well takes between 30 and 40 minutes depending on what she wants. For a morning at home, she'll want something neat but not elaborate. Hair up, a few curls at the temples, no flowers, no combs beyond the plain tortoiseshell ones. Who is calling today, you ask? Because asking about the day gives her something to organise her thoughts around, which sometimes loosens the tight silence. She watches herself in the mirror. You watch her watching herself, which is something you do now without thinking about it. "Mrs. Harrington," she says, "Mrs. Cole, and Mrs. Brindley, if she's feeling well enough." Mrs. Harrington is the wife of a banker and is considered excellent company. Mrs. Cole is the wife of someone you haven't identified yet, but you know from context that she is important in some social way you don't fully grasp. Mrs. Brindley is the wife of a clergyman and is considered very dull, but is included in morning calls because excluding her would be unkind, and Mrs. Ashworth is not unkind. You work through her hair. Your fingers know this now, the tension required to create a curl that will hold without pins, the angle of the comb that creates a smooth flat top without looking stiff, the particular placement of the side parts that frames her face in the way she prefers. Hair is quiet work, intimate work. You're touching someone's head, which is one of the most personal things in the world, and you're doing it in silence. And in that silence, things are communicated that cannot be said aloud. Right now, your hands are telling her, I see that you're tense. I'm not going to make it worse. I'm going to do this carefully. And her body, almost imperceptibly, relaxes a fraction. You note this. File it away. The morning callers arrive at 10. By then, Mrs. Ashworth is in the front drawing room, dressed in the green silk, hair completed, hands composed in her lap, a book open on the table beside her that she has clearly not been reading. The room smells of the flowers brought in yesterday, white roses and something with a sharp, sweet smell you haven't learned to identify yet, and the coal fire that's been lit specifically for the visitors, despite the fact that April is warm enough not to technically require it. The fire is not for warmth. The fire is a statement. This household is comfortable. This household does not economize on coal for guests. Your job during a morning at home is to be almost invisible. You stand near the door to the back passage and you wait, and when the maid brings in the tea you help arrange it, and when a guest's shawl needs adjusting you adjust it, and otherwise you are furniture. But you're watching. You've been watching, really watching, since Mary Tanner's comment 3 months ago. Mrs. Harrington arrives first. She's a small, bright-eyed woman in her 40s, with a manner that suggests she's permanently interested in everything. She sits down, accepts tea, and immediately begins arranging herself. You notice, because you've started noticing, how she positions her fan. She's brought a fan. It's not unusual. Even for a morning call, women often carry fans as a matter of course, and she has it closed in her left hand. She opens it fractionally as she sits, just a partial opening, not fanning herself, just positioning. Mrs. Ashworth sees this. You know she sees it because of a tiny fractional adjustment of her own. Her right hand moves to the edge of her saucer and rests there. Mrs. Cole arrives 10 minutes later. She's taller, younger, with a slightly anxious expression that she seems to be working to control. Her morning dress is pale yellow and her gloves are still on, which is unusual. Callers usually remove their gloves immediately upon being seated. It's a social signal that means I am here, I am comfortable, I am staying. She doesn't remove her gloves. Mrs. Ashworth notices. Her hand moves from the saucer to the arm of her chair. And you notice Mrs. Ashworth noticing, but you don't understand what any of it means, and you are beginning to feel the particular frustration of someone who can see a pattern but cannot read it. Mrs. Brindley arrives last and is, as predicted, dull. She talks about the weather in a thorough way, and then the state of the Aldgate Road, and then her youngest child's cold. The other women make the appropriate sounds. They are courteous, they are present. But they are not, you realise, actually there. Whatever conversation is happening, the real one, the one with the fan and the gloves and the adjustments too small to catch, unless you've been trained to look, is happening above the dull, kind Mrs. Brindley's head, and she is completely unaware of it. You stand by the door and feel for the first time like someone trying to watch a play in a language they don't speak. That afternoon you find Mary Tanner. She's in the back garden of the Pembroke house, sitting on the stone bench beside the kitchen garden with a piece of embroidery in her lap. She's working on something with green and white thread, in a pattern that, from a distance, looks like abstract vines. You sit down beside her without being invited. She doesn't seem surprised. "Tell me what you meant," you say, "about watching what she does instead of what she says." Mary looks at you sideways. Then she looks back at her embroidery. Her needle goes in and comes out again, a small, precise motion. "What did you see today?" You describe the morning call, the fan, the gloves, the hand movements, all of it. You describe it carefully, the way you've learned to describe Mrs. Ashworth's physical state, accurately without interpretation, just the facts of body and position. Mary listens. She doesn't stop embroidering. When you finish, she says, "The fan at half open means we need to speak privately. The gloves kept on means I'm not safe to speak freely. The hand on the saucer means I understand. The hand moving to the chair arm means, but not now." Silence. That's... You try to find the right word. "That's a conversation." "Yes." "About what?" "I don't know. That's Mrs. Ashworth's business, not mine." She looks at you properly now. "But you asked me about the language, and there it is. You've just watched your mistress have an entire conversation in front of a clergyman's wife who doesn't speak the language, and no one said a word that mattered." You sit with this for a moment. The garden smells of turned earth and something green and bitter, herbs in the kitchen plot that have just started growing. A bird is making a sound in the apple tree 2 gardens over. The afternoon is quiet in the way London afternoons in good weather are quiet. Which is to say they are not actually quiet at all, but the noise is familiar enough to register as background. "How long have women been doing this?" you ask. Mary gives a small smile. "How long do you think?" "I don't know. 100 years?" "Try several hundred." She pulls her thread through and knotted it. "Maybe always, in some form." The specific vocabulary changes. The fans and the flowers, those are more recent. But women have always needed ways to say things they couldn't say aloud, so they found other ways to say them. She folds her embroidery. "Come back tomorrow. I'll start teaching you properly. If you want to be any good at this job, any really good, you need to understand what's happening in the room, not just what you're told is happening." She picks up her basket and goes inside. You stay on the bench for a while, alone in the small garden with the smell of herbs and turned earth, thinking about conversations you've been sitting in the middle of without knowing it for 8 months. Here is something they don't tell you about being a lady's maid. The job description, as you understood it coming from Yorkshire, was this: help a wealthy woman dress and undress, do her hair, keep her clothes clean and mended, accompany her to events, be discreet. That's not wrong, but it's like describing the sea as wet, technically accurate, missing everything that matters. What a lady's maid actually is, what a good one actually is something closer to an interpreter, a code breaker, a diplomat in a minor territory. Because Mrs. Catherine Ashworth does not live inside her house. Not really. She lives inside a social world, a dense, intricate, unwritten social world of obligations and relationships and hierarchies and histories, all of it held together by behaviour and appearance and the invisible web of understanding that connects every woman in her social circle. Every morning she gets dressed for that world. That's what the dressing ritual actually is. She's arming herself. Every item of clothing, every accessory, every choice about colour and style and arrangement, it communicates. It speaks to every person who sees her. And behind that, underneath it, alongside it, run in parallel to the public performance, there is the language Mary is starting to teach you. The language with no official name. Some women call it the silent tongue. Some call it simply the code. Historians will later call it fan language, or the language of flowers, or glove signals, as if each piece of it is a separate thing, a parlour novelty, a charming historical curiosity. But it isn't separate. It's one language with many vocabularies. Like English has words from Latin and Norse and French, all blended into something that works together. This language has dialects from a dozen sources, all serving the same purpose, saying the thing you cannot say. Your first lesson with Mary happens on a Tuesday in the half hour between Mrs. Ashworth's afternoon rest and her evening preparation. Mary brings a fan. It is a folded fan, made of painted silk over ivory sticks, about 9 inches long when closed. The silk is painted with a scene of shepherdesses that is meant to look pastoral and charming, and is actually slightly menacing once you've looked at it long enough. The shepherdesses have expressions that suggest they know exactly what is happening and are pretending otherwise. Start with the fan, Mary says. It's the most common vocabulary, the most visible. She opens it fully and holds it in her right hand, moving it slowly in front of her face. Following, she says, moving the fan from right to left in front of the face, means I am interested. I want to know more. You'll see this when a woman is being introduced to someone at an event. If she starts fanning herself from right to left, she's telling her companion that she wants to continue this particular acquaintance. She closes it sharply. This means no, a single sharp closure. Means no, I disagree. I want this stopped. I'm not interested. In conversation, in any context, someone is about to do something. Another woman closes her fan. It's a warning or a refusal. She opens it partially, about halfway, and holds it in her left hand, raised to approximately the level of her chin. Bring the folded fan to your lips. Hold it there, she demonstrates. Means I want to speak to you privately. You saw this in Mrs. Ashworth's drawing room. Mrs. Harrington. Yes, and she used her left hand, not her right. Left hand, the message is urgent. Right hand, it can wait. You try to absorb this, the specific detail of it. Left versus right. The degree of opening, the speed of movement. How do you remember all of it? The same way you remember anything, Mary looks at you levelly. Practice and necessity. She places the fan over her heart. Love. Obvious symbolism. Used mostly by younger women, you'd look absurd doing it at 35. But at 16 it's comprehensible. She places it over her right ear. I've been told, as in, I have received a message, I have received information. You might see this when a woman hears gossip. A quick fan to the right ear before she composes her expression. It happens faster than most people can register. She taps the closed fan against her left palm. I'm waiting, impatient. Repeated tapping means increasingly impatient. You'll see this when someone is ready to leave a gathering but her companion is still occupied. She sets the fan down on the table between you, flat. Put a closed fan flat on a table means I am not speaking to you. The end. Don't try again tonight. Or, the conversation is over and was never happening. Silence. You look at the fan on the table, at the painted shepherdesses with their knowing expressions. This is... You try to articulate it. This is all the things you can't say. Yes, because you're not allowed to say them. Mary tilts her head slightly, some of it, but also because saying them would be dangerous. You have to understand, Mrs. Ashworth can't tell Mrs. Harrington that she needs to speak privately in front of Mrs. Brindley, because if she says it, Mrs. Brindley knows, and Mrs. Brindley, God love her, has a husband who talks to other men, and those other men talk to Mr. Ashworth. A pause. Or to men who know Mr. Ashworth. You feel something shift slightly in your understanding. Is there something... That's not your question to ask, Mary says, not unkindly. And it's not mine either. What we learn to serve better, not to satisfy our own curiosity. She picks up the fan again. The flowers. Let's start with those. They're more complicated, but they're also more permanent. A fan signal lasts for a second. A flower pinned to your bodice lasts all morning. It's a longer, louder message. Let me tell you something about flowers in 1823. Flowers in 1823 are not just decorative. Well, they're decorative. They are arranged in vases and pressed into albums and dried in envelopes and painted in watercolours and embroidered onto everything that can be embroidered. The aesthetic relationship between genteel English womanhood and flowers in this period is so deep and so total that it has its own word, floristry, and its own industry and its own shelves of books dedicated to the art of arrangement. But underneath the decoration is a code. The code is sometimes called the language of flowers or floriography, and in 20 years, in the 1840s, there will be published dictionaries of it. Thick, serious books that list hundreds of flowers and their meanings, sold openly in bookshops, used by both men and women, treated as a romantic novelty. But right now, in 1823, it's not a published system. It's a living, breathing, evolving vocabulary that you absorb through proximity, through observation, through being told by women like Mary Tanner, who was told by women before her. Mary names them. You repeat them back. Your hands are cold again in the chill of the afternoon. You press them into your lap and recite. Red rose, passionate love, which everyone knows, which makes it simultaneously the most used and the most risky. White rose, silence, secrecy. I am keeping your secret. Yellow rose, jealousy. Used as a warning. Worn by a woman who has been wronged. Seen by another woman who recognises it. The correct response is to keep your distance from whatever situation caused it. Rosemary, remembrance, but also loyalty. A sprig of rosemary in your bodice is a message to someone. I have not forgotten. I have not changed. Lavender, distrust. This one surprises you. Lavender smells like safety, like home, but worn in a specific way, braided into hair or pinned high on the left shoulder, it means I don't trust what is happening. Ivy, fidelity, constancy. It clings, it holds. A woman wearing ivy leaves is communicating something about endurance. Forget-me-not, obvious, but worn at the wrist rather than the neck, it's specifically remember me to the person I cannot mention. Violet, modesty, officially, but in certain combinations with other flowers, I know what you're concealing. Orange blossom, traditionally worn at weddings for purity. Worn at any other time, in a social gathering, there's a marriage being discussed. Worn by a young woman who is not engaged, I am being pressured. That last one stops you. Being pressured by her family into a match she hasn't agreed to. A woman wearing a single orange blossom who is not yet engaged is telling every woman in the room who can read it, I need help, or at least I need to be seen. You think about this for a moment, about the specific kind of loneliness that requires you to send your distress signal via the flowers on your dress. hoping someone will read it, not knowing if anyone will. Does anyone ever respond? Sometimes. It depends on the women present. It depends on whether someone with influence can intervene. Sometimes nothing can be done. Mary's voice is neutral, matter-of-fact. Knowing and being able to act are different things. She moves on to gloves. Gloves are not flowers. Gloves are not beautiful or poetic. Gloves are practical, business-like objects worn because the skin of your hands is exposed, and the skin of your hands is, in this era, considered significant. Ladies' gloves in 1823 can be short or long, white or tinted, buttoned or unbuttoned. They're made of kid leather or cotton or silk, and the quality and whiteness of your gloves is one of the most immediate visible markers of your social standing. This makes them an excellent vocabulary. Gloves kept on after sitting, Mary says. You saw that with Mrs. Cole. She wasn't comfortable speaking freely. Yes, but it's more specific than that. Gloves kept on means I am here under constraint. Not just discomfort, constraint. Something or someone has imposed on her presence. She is not here entirely of her own free will. Her husband told her to come, or someone else, or she's being watched in a way she cannot explain, or she owes a debt of obligation that requires her presence despite her preference. You try to imagine how that would feel, sitting in someone's drawing room, keeping your gloves on as a signal to the other women. I was sent here. I am not free. Does it work as a signal? It works if someone reads it, which is why you're learning this. You nod. A glove dropped, Mary continues. Deliberately dropped. Not accidentally, you can tell the difference. An accidental drop is followed by a woman looking startled and bending to retrieve it. A deliberate drop is a clean, controlled release, often with the hand slightly extended, means, I want you to come to me, or follow me when you leave, depending on context. A glove pressed to the lips, admiration. Similar to the fan signal, but more permanent, you hold it there longer. It's not a passing movement. A glove clenched in the fist, held at the side. Anger, controlled anger, the kind that must not be allowed to show. Removing one glove slowly, finger by finger, while maintaining eye contact with a specific person, this is personal and direct, and means something that varies depending on the relationship, but essentially, I see you. I am paying you specific attention. Placing a glove palm up on a surface and not retrieving it, there is something here to find. A message left under a glove or an object. The glove is the marker. You're trying to write this down in your head, trying to construct some kind of interior catalogue. But it's not like learning a list. It's more than that. It's learning a grammar, a sense of how the elements combine, how context alters meaning, how the same gesture in a ballroom and in a private drawing room and in a church pew might mean three different things. This is going to take a long time, you say. Mary gives you the expression, you've learned to associate with the phrase yes, obviously. Everything worth knowing takes a long time. She picks up her embroidery again. The needlework is for next week, and calling cards after that, and before any of those, she looks up at you. You need to start watching Mrs. Ashworth properly. Not her face, not her hands, the space around her. What she does when she thinks no one is watching. You feel a small, careful alertness in your chest. You think something is happening with her. I think you haven't been paying attention long enough to know if something is or isn't, so start paying attention. It's mid-April, and London in April is a city that seems to be continually surprised by its own weather. The mornings are cold. The afternoons are occasionally warm enough to seem like something is starting, some promise of summer, the smell of green things and warming stone and the particular sweetness of the London parks in spring, and then by 5 o'clock a grey wind comes off the river and reminds you that you are in England and hope is a limited resource. You walk to the market on Gracechurch Street for Mrs. Diver twice a week, and you begin to pay attention to everything differently now. Not just the women in your household, all women. The market women, who have their own language entirely separate from the drawing room vocabulary, louder, more physical, the language of women who own their noise and their space and do not need to be subtle about it, but still a language of signals and territory. Which stall is whose? Who defers to whom? The subtle physical negotiations of crowded commerce, the women passing in carriages, their faces at the windows, their expression as they watch the street, the angle of a parasol that might be casual or might not be. The women in church on Sunday, which is an occasion of remarkable density of communication, because church is one of the few places where men and women sit together in public for an extended time, and where the women's language operates under the most constrained conditions. You watch a woman in the pew ahead of you arrange and rearrange the flowers on her hat 3 times during the sermon. You watch another woman's hand move to her prayer book, and then away, and then back in a pattern that is not random. You watch a woman 2 rows back spend 30 seconds adjusting her gloves in a way that makes you, now, wonder. You're not imagining this. That thought arrives one Sunday morning as you're walking back to Gracechurch Street in the thin April sunshine, and it sits in you with a kind of weight. You're not imagining this. This is real. This is happening. All around you, in every room you enter, women are talking in a language you're finally beginning to hear, and you have been deaf to it for 17 years. The musical evening at the Pembrokes' house is on a Friday. Mrs. Pembroke's musical evenings happen every other Friday through the spring social season. They are considered by the women who attend them to be the better kind of social event, meaning they have actual music, which gives everyone something to pay ostensible attention to, and which fills the silences that in other gatherings would have to be filled with conversation. The music is provided by a Miss Elvira Hartington, who plays the pianoforte with genuine skill and who is 22 years old and not yet married, which is a situation that causes, from what you can observe, some anxiety to her mother and some carefully managed indifference to Elvira herself. Your job is to attend Mrs. Ashworth, to stand near the back of the room and be available, to make sure her shawl doesn't slip, to fetch water if she needs it, to be quietly, efficiently present. But tonight you are also watching. The room fills between 7 and 8. 23 women, 4 men. The men are husbands and brothers and 1 uncle, present because musical evenings are technically mixed gatherings, but you can see this now, present in the way of furniture. They are there. They are decorative. They are not part of what is happening. Mrs. Ashworth arrives composed, wearing dark blue silk. The blue is exactly the colour of serious attention, of I am here and I am paying attention, which you've learned from Mary is a deliberate choice, with a white rosebud pinned at her shoulder. White rose, secrecy, silence. I am keeping your secret. You file this. The women greet each other in the ordinary choreography of greeting, clasped hands, brief cheek-to-cheek approximations, small verbal exchanges about the weather and the music and the other guests. All of it surface, all of it correct. Underneath it, in the space between the surface and the floor, something is moving. You've been watching Mrs. Harrington. She arrived before Mrs. Ashworth, which is information in itself. Usually she arrives after, lets herself be announced into a room already gathered, takes a moment that is half ceremony and half assessment. Tonight she's already here, already seated, already installed near the fireplace with her tea and her expression of bright social interest, and her fan is on her lap, closed, left hand. I need to speak privately, urgently. From across the room, Mrs. Ashworth sees this and does not look at it, looks past it, over it, through it, with the practiced ease of someone who's been communicating this way for 20 years. But her right hand, set on her chair arm, opens slightly, just the fingers relaxing from a light curl. Message received. Not yet. And then Miss Elvira begins to play. Music in 1823, at a private evening, is not background. Well, it's slightly background. It's foreground that everyone treats as background. There is a kind of elaborate social fiction in which the music is nominally the point of the evening. People nod appreciatively. There is applause at the end of each piece. Occasionally someone requests a particular song while simultaneously it provides cover, a reason to not be talking, a reason to be still and contained with your hands in your lap and your eyes apparently directed at the pianist. Miss Elvira plays extremely well. She plays a Clementi sonata with clear, even articulation, her hands moving with that particular economy that marks someone who has practiced not for performance but for mastery. You're genuinely listening for the first part of the first piece. Her playing is good enough to take your attention properly. And then you start to watch the room. The arrangement of 23 women in a room, when you know how to look, is remarkable. The women who know each other well are not necessarily sitting together. Social evenings have a complicated geometry in which nearness to certain people implies intimacy, and intimacy implies alliance, and alliance is information that not everyone should have. So you sit near the people you want to appear to be allied with, and you find ways to communicate with the people you actually need to communicate with across the distance. The distance is navigated with small things. A glance held 1 second too long, a smile that is not quite directed at the person sitting next to you, but at the person 2 seats down who receives it and responds with a fractional turn of her head. A fan opening and closing in a particular rhythm, a hand moving to adjust a necklace in a way that is not about the necklace. You stand at the back of the room and watch, and you are beginning, only beginning, but still to see the shape of the conversations happening over the music. Mrs. Harrington is talking to Mrs. Ashworth about something. They've exchanged 6 distinct signals in the 30 minutes since Mrs. Ashworth arrived. You have caught 4 of them. The other 2 happened in moments when your attention was elsewhere. What you can read, imperfectly, partially, like trying to understand a language from context clues. Mrs. Harrington: I have information. Ailsa concerns you directly. Mrs. Ashworth: I cannot act on it tonight. Mrs. Harrington: It cannot wait. Mrs. Ashworth: Tomorrow. Send a note through the back. You're not certain of this translation. You might be wrong about the 4th one entirely. Mrs. Ashworth's right hand moved to her skirt in a gesture that might mean through the back. Mary taught you this. Pressing the flat of your hand to the front of your skirt means through the front door, normal channels. A slight gathering of the skirt at the side means through the servant's passage, or might just mean that she was adjusting her position. But you're not imagining it. You are definitely not imagining it. After Miss Elvira's second piece, there is a pause for refreshments, and the room breaks into its natural clusters. You move through to help with the tea things, and you pass close to Mrs. Harrington, who is standing near the window now, and you smell her perfume. Something sharp and specific, not rose or lavender, something slightly unusual, and then you see, pinned to her bodice, a small spray of flowers, yellow freesia, and mixed among them, 3 small purple flowers you have to look at twice before you recognize them. Violets. I know what you're concealing. You carry the tea things back to the table and you stand very still for a moment, processing this, and then you look up and find Mrs. Ashworth's eyes on you across the room. She looks away immediately. The walk home from the Pembrokes is 15 minutes on foot. Mrs. Ashworth takes the carriage, which is 4 years old and slightly small for the degree of respectability it is supposed to convey, and you ride on the outside with the driver in the cold April night. The driver is called Thomas, and has been with the Ashworth household for 6 years, and regards his employer, as far as you can tell, with a kind of placid incuriosity. He drives the carriage, he maintains the horse, everything else that happens inside is a different country. You watch London pass in the dark. There are not many gas lamps on this route yet. The gas lighting is spreading slowly from the centre outward, and Gracechurch Street has it, but the Pembrokes neighbourhood is still mostly oil lamps, and between the lit patches the darkness is substantial. The streets are still active at this hour. You can hear voices from tavern windows, the sound of a cart horse on cobblestones, 2 men arguing somewhere in the dark, their voices carrying without content just the shape of anger. In one doorway, a woman is sitting with her back to the building, head down. She might be sleeping, she might be sick, she might be dead. The carriage passes before you can tell, and Thomas doesn't slow. You sit with the cold night air on your face and you think about the 2 worlds you've been spending this evening in. The world of the musical evening, with its warm lights and its good music and its elaborate invisible language, and the world of the doorway. Both of them are women. Both of them are in 1823 London. Both of them navigating a world that has decided in 100 ways, large and small, that women's voices don't count the same way men's do. One response to that is the language, the system, the fan and the flowers and the glove. The other response is the doorway. These thoughts are too large for a Friday night on the outside of a carriage, and you let them go, mostly. Store them for later. Right now your job is to get home, help Mrs. Ashworth out of her evening clothes, hang the blue silk carefully, and get to bed before midnight so you can be functional at 6. But they stay with you. A kind of weight. The note arrives 3 days later. Not through the front door, through the back, through the servants' passage, delivered by a young girl, maybe 12 years old, who said she was from Mrs. Harrington's kitchen, and handed it to Cook and left before anyone could ask questions. Cook gave it to Mrs. Diver. Mrs. Diver gave it to you. For Mrs. Ashworth, Mrs. Diver said, without intonation, she is a woman who has mastered the art of communicating nothing when she chooses to. Morning correspondence. You brought it up on the silver tray with the rest of the morning letters, but you noticed, because you notice things now, that this one had no seal, only a fold. The paper was fine but unmarked, no crest, no monogram. Mrs. Ashworth saw it among the letters, and her hand, the one holding her coffee cup, stilled for a fraction of a second. Then she picked it up last, after the others. "That'll be all for now," she said. You left the room. That morning's lesson with Mary is about calling cards. "The fold," Mary says. She's holding a small card, the kind left when making a call, about 3 inches by 2, engraved with a name and sometimes an address, between 2 fingers. There are 7 standard folds. Each one means something different. She folds down the top right corner. This is the most common. It means you, called personally. You weren't just sending a servant with the card, you actually came to the door. It means, I consider you important enough to come myself. She unfolds it and folds the top left corner instead. Condolences, sympathy. You send this to someone who has had a loss, when a call in person would be inappropriate or when you want to signal your sympathy without the weight of a formal visit. Bottom right corner. Congratulations, good news, something positive. Bottom left corner. This is the interesting one. She holds it up so you can see the fold clearly. This means farewell. I am leaving. I may not return. This is goodbye in a card. You think about what it would feel like to receive that in the mail. A small card with its corner folded down. Nothing more. And across the top, Mary continues, folding the top third of the card down in a strip. This means for the whole family. It's a courtesy call. The card covers everyone in the household, not just the person named. 6, you say. You said 7? She looks at you with something like approval. A tear. She mimes it. A small tear at one corner. Controlled. Deliberate. Not an accident. On the right side. I need to speak to you without your husband knowing. On the left. I need to speak to you without your wife knowing. Both sides. I need to speak to you without anyone knowing. Silence. That one, you say. That one is high stakes, yes. You don't send that unless you mean it, and you don't receive it without taking it seriously. You think about the note that arrived this morning through the back passage. You didn't see whether it had folds or tears. Mrs. Diver had handled it before you, but the fact of its arrival, unmarked through the servant's entrance, tells you something on its own. Mary, you say it carefully. What happens when the language fails? She looks at you steadily. What do you mean? When the message doesn't get through, or gets through to the wrong person, or when someone who can read it chooses to use it against you. A pause. Then it becomes dangerous. She sets the cards down. This is why you learn it properly. A woman who uses the language poorly, who uses signals incorrectly or in the wrong context, can expose herself, can expose others, the fan at the wrong angle, the wrong flower pinned to the wrong dress. Has that happened? Has it happened? She repeats it in a tone that suggests she is deciding how much to tell you. A woman I knew when I was first starting. She'd learned the flowers, but not well. She wore hyacinths to a gathering, white hyacinths, as decoration. She thought they were pretty. She didn't know that white hyacinths in certain circles mean I forgive you. There were a woman present she had a public disagreement with 6 months prior. The woman saw the hyacinths and told everyone that her opponent had publicly begged for forgiveness and reconciliation. Was she ruined? Not ruined, but humiliated, and the other woman, the one who misread it, or claimed to misread it, got a reputation advantage she hadn't earned. You think about this, about the way a mistake in this language is not like a grammatical error or a wrong word. It's a social act that happens in public in front of witnesses and can be misused. The language can be weaponized. All language can be weaponized. Mary looks at you. You're Yorkshire. You know what it means when someone in your village starts a rumour. Same thing, just quieter. May arrives with better weather. The afternoons are genuinely warm now. Warm enough that the windows of the Grace Church Street house are opened in the morning and the smell of London comes in freely, which is not always pleasant. London smells being what they are, a layered geological record of coal and horse and river and food and people. but the warmth of it is welcome after the long winter. Mrs. Ashworth's days have a different quality now. She seems, and you're watching, carefully enough to have an opinion on this, quietly watchful, coiled, slightly, like a woman waiting for something. The note through the back passage was followed by 2 more at irregular intervals. You know this not because you've intercepted them. You haven't. That would be a breach you couldn't come back from. But because Cook mentions them in the oblique way Cook mentions things she knows, but considers not her business. Delivery for upstairs, she says each time, and her voice has the particular studied neutrality of someone who has decided that whatever is happening upstairs is not their concern. You've also noticed that Mrs. Ashworth has started wearing rosemary more frequently. It's small, a sprig tucked into her hair, or worked into a small arrangement on her dressing table, or pressed into the lining of her gloves. You found this last one while preparing them, a tiny folded sprig of rosemary wedged into the left glove at the wrist seam. Remembrance, loyalty. I have not forgotten. I have not changed. But to whom? This is the question that is increasingly difficult to ignore, partly because you're now trained to notice, and increasingly difficult not to notice, and partly because you're beginning to feel a subtle, bone-deep feeling that whatever is happening may involve you, or may require you. Not because you're important. You're an apprentice in the most literal sense. You're being trained to see, but you haven't yet been asked to act. But something is building. On a Thursday in the 2nd week of May, Mrs. Ashworth asks you to buy flowers. This is not unusual. You buy flowers for the house regularly, from the market on Gracechurch Street, or occasionally from a woman who comes to the back door with bunches from somewhere further out, where things actually grow. But Mrs. Ashworth specifies, this morning, exactly what she wants. White roses, she says, and forget-me-nots, and a small bunch of rosemary if she has it. She's not looking at you. She's looking at her dressing table, at her own reflection. For the house, you ask? For myself. A pause. I need to have something prepared for Friday. Friday is 4 days away, the next musical evening at the Pembrokes. Of course, you say. And then, because you are cautious and specific now, white roses only, or any white flowers. She looks at you in the mirror, then, and there is a quality to her look that you can't quite pass. Something between assessment and relief. White roses specifically, she says, and the forget-me-nots braided. Do you know how to braid flowers into hair? I can learn. Ask Mary Tanner. She knows. She'll show you. Mary shows you on Saturday, 2 weeks before the crucial Friday. You sit in the garden of the Pembroke house with Mary's hands in a small bunch of ribboned flowers and your own hands copying her movements, and you learn to make a thin, flexible braid of forget-me-nots that can be worked into hair without damage, that will stay through an evening, that will hold its form and its colour under candlelight. It's delicate work. Your hands are still not as soft as they should be, and the flowers are fragile in a specific way. They don't tear exactly. They bruise. They go limp and discoloured if you handle them wrong, and you have to develop a feel for the right pressure that is lighter than you'd expect. Lighter than you think, Mary says. Always lighter than you think. With the flowers, with the fan, with everything. The touch has to be light. You can do more with less pressure. Your fingers adjust. Try again. This time the braid holds better. Why white roses and forget-me-nots together, you ask? Mary's hands still for a moment. Who told you to learn this? Mrs. Ashworth, for Friday. A pause that is not long but is loaded. White rose, Mary says. Silence, secrecy. I am keeping your secret. Forget-me-nots at the wrist. Remember me to the person I cannot mention. Together. She doesn't finish. Together they mean something specific. Together, braided in the hair, they are a message that is both broadcast and personal. They're saying, I am here. I remember. I am silent about it, but I am here. They're for someone in the room. She's meeting someone at the musical evening. I don't know that, Mary says carefully, and neither do you. But that's what it means. Mary looks at the garden, at the herbs coming up in the kitchen plot, at the small apple tree with its tight new leaves. A bird lands in it and then leaves, startled by something. What it means, she says finally, is that you need to be very attentive on Friday, and very careful, and you need to understand something about this work that nobody will tell you directly, but that every woman in service learns eventually. She looks at you. We are their memory. We are their hands when their hands can't be seen to move. We carry the language between them sometimes, not just for them. And when it matters, when something hinges on a piece of this language being correctly delivered or correctly kept, we are trusted with something more valuable than money. A pause. You understand what I'm telling you? Yes, you say. You do. You actually do. 3 days before Friday, the thing shifts from background to foreground. You are in Mrs. Ashworth's dressing room, pressing the dinner dress she wore on Tuesday. It has a small mark at the hem from a careless step. You're working the mark out with a damp cloth and patience, when you hear voices from the corridor, or one voice, Mrs. Ashworth's voice. The quality of it, not the words, you can't hear words, just the register, is different from her usual drawing room quality. Lower, tighter, a voice used carefully, a pause, then a different voice, a man's voice. Mr. Ashworth. You work the cloth on the hem and listen without listening, which is a skill you've developed. You keep your body occupied so that no one looking in would see you still and attentive. Your hands move, your ears are all the way open. The conversation in the corridor lasts maybe 4 minutes. You hear your mistress's voice 3 distinct times, each time brief, each time controlled. The 3rd time there is something underneath the control, a tension, a resistance, that you hear the way you'd hear a wrong note in music, something that should resolve into quiet but doesn't quite. Then silence, a door closing. You finish the work on the hem. When Mrs. Ashworth comes into the dressing room 20 minutes later, she is arranged. Her face is composed, her posture is correct, her hands are still. She sits at the dressing table. She looks at herself in the mirror for a moment that is a little too long. Agnes, ma'am, I need you to do something for me. Your hand still over the hem. You wait. On Friday at the Pembrokes, there will be someone there I need to speak to. She pauses. Not speak to directly. I need to give her something, a small packet. I'll prepare it, and I need it to reach her without being passed hand to hand in front of others. Silence. You mean through me, you say. Yes, through you. You'll be near the back of the room as usual. She'll find you. She'll let you know in a way you'll understand. How will I know it's her? Mrs. Ashworth looks at you in the mirror. She'll be wearing blue, dark blue, and she'll carry a fan with a specific pattern, red and white alternating. When she approaches you, her right hand will tap the fan twice against her left palm. That's your signal. I'm waiting. I'm ready. And I give her the packet. Yes. And say nothing. Nothing. You think about this for a moment. about what this is and what it isn't, about the risk involved. You carrying something, not knowing what, between two women in a social gathering where anything unusual is noted and remembered. What is in the packet, you ask? Mrs. Ashworth's eyes meet yours in the mirror. A letter, that's all, a letter, you nod. All right, you say, and you pick up the iron again, and you finish the hem, and the two of you exist in the ordinary quiet of the dressing room, and nothing is said, and everything is understood. The Friday arrives with overcast sky and the smell of rain coming. By the time you're helping Mrs. Ashworth dress for the musical evening, 7:30, the carriage coming at 8, the overcast has thickened to the particular London grey that means rain within 2 hours, and sure enough, by 8:15, as you're riding on the outside of the carriage again, a thin spring rain has started. The packet is small, about the size of a folded handkerchief, wrapped in plain paper and tied with white thread. Mrs. Ashworth placed it in your hands this afternoon in the dressing room with the brief, exact manner of someone who has decided and is not entertaining reconsideration. You've tucked it inside your dress, against your ribs. You can feel it there as the carriage moves through the wet streets, a small, flat pressure, not uncomfortable, just present. You think about what Mary said. We are their memory. We are their hands when their hands can't be seen to move. The packet is a letter. Mrs. Ashworth said so. A letter to a woman in dark blue with a red and white fan. You don't know who this woman is. You don't know what the letter contains. You don't need to. This is not your story. You're the carrier, the bridge, the pair of hands operating below the level of social visibility. But you are also paying attention, because something is happening that is larger than a musical evening, and you can feel it the way you've learned to feel the tension in a room, a kind of weight in the air, a slightly too careful quality to everything around you. The Pembrokes' house is lit from every window. The room is arranged the same as 2 Fridays ago. Chairs in informal clusters, Miss Elvira's pianoforte positioned to face the centre, the good candelabras brought out and lit, coal, fire despite the marginal need for it. The flowers on the mantelpiece, which you noticed last time but understand better now, a specific arrangement. White tulips, forgiveness of faults, lavender, distrust, and a small sheaf of wheat. Prosperity, but also plenty, abundance. This is a house that has what you need. The lavender is interesting. The lavender in the Pembrokes' own house. Distrust. Distrust of what? Or of whom? You file this and stand near the back wall, near the passage to the rear of the house, which is your usual position. The guests arrive across 20 minutes. You watch them come in and you watch the room arrange itself, and you watch the smaller architecture of seating choices and greeting intensities and fan positions. You are watching for dark blue and a red and white fan. She arrives at 8:10. You see her before you place her significance. A woman maybe 40, dark-haired, handsome in a composed way that suggests she's been handsome for a long time and has stopped trying to be. Her dress is dark blue as described, a deeper blue than Mrs. Ashworth's, the blue of a clear winter sky in the afternoon. Not the decorative blue of evening wear, but something more serious. She does not look at you. She greets Mrs. Pembroke, greets 2 women she evidently knows, accepts tea, sits in a chair halfway between the fireplace and the window. The red and white fan is in her right hand, closed. She has not acknowledged you. She won't until it's time. Mrs. Ashworth arrives shortly after, and you watch them greet each other. A normal social greeting, the air kiss approximation, a few brief words, nothing that registers as significant. Both of them composed, both of them performing the ordinary texture of a social evening. But Mrs. Ashworth, as she turns away, allows her hand to brush the side of her skirt, a small, gathering gesture, side of the skirt. Through the back passage, she has seen her, and she's directing the exchange to happen in the back, away from the main room. You wait. Miss Elvira begins to play. The music tonight is Schubert, the Wanderer Fantasy, which was composed the previous year and is considered very modern and somewhat emotionally difficult, which makes it an interesting choice for a gathering that is also emotionally difficult in ways the audience doesn't know it knows. You listen to it with half your attention and watch the room with the other half. 18 women tonight, 4 men. 2 of the men are talking to each other near the window, with the particular absorption of men who have found each other at a gathering they'd both rather not be at. The other 2 are listening to the music with genuine attention. 15 minutes into the first piece, the woman in dark blue rises quietly. This happens. Women sometimes need to step out, it's unremarkable, and moves toward the passage near you. As she passes, her fan, still closed in her right hand, taps twice against her left palm. You follow her. The passage behind the main rooms of the Pembroke house is narrow and smells of beeswax and the particular stillness of a part of a house that is maintained but not lived in. There are candles on the side table giving just enough light. She stops at the end of the passage. She turns to face you. You reach inside your dress and take out the packet. It has been against your ribs for 4 hours and is warm with your body heat. You hold it out. She takes it without speaking. She does not look at the packet. She looks at you. You think she's deciding something, assessing you, not the way people assess servants, that sweep of the eyes that categorizes and dismisses, but in a different way, as a person. Then she says very quietly, "Does she know how much this costs her?" You don't know how to answer this. You don't know enough. So you say, because it is the truth, "I don't know, ma'am," but she made the choice herself. A pause. The woman nods. There is something in her face, not satisfaction exactly, not relief exactly, something more complex. The face of someone who's been waiting for something and has received it and is already calculating what comes next. She tucks the packet into her bodice, smooths her dress, adjusts the angle of her fan in her hand. She goes back to the main room. You stand in the passage alone for a moment, in the beeswax smell and the candlelight, your heart beating slightly faster than usual, your hands cold. Then you smooth your own dress and go back to your place near the wall. Miss Elvira is reaching the most technically demanding section of the fantasy, the piano thundering with something that sounds like the inside of a problem being worked out, each chord a new question, the resolution still far away. You watch Mrs. Ashworth, who is watching the pianist, whose expression gives nothing away. Nothing. Not relief, not anxiety. Nothing. She has perfected this, you realize. The expression of appropriate attentiveness that tells you absolutely nothing about what is happening inside. She's been practicing this expression, this performance of composed presence, for as long as she has known that her real expressions needed to be managed. That's not acting. That's armor. Here is what you learn afterward. Not immediately, not that night, and not in a single conversation, and not in the way of anyone sitting you down and explaining. You learn it the way you've learned most things since arriving in London, which is the way archaeology works. Layer by layer, through proximity and attention, through the accumulation of small things into a larger shape. The woman in dark blue is Mrs. Eleanor Marsh. She is the widow of a solicitor who died 4 years ago, leaving her with a moderate income, a small house in Islington, and more freedom than most women in her position. Mrs. Ashworth has known Mrs. Marsh since before her marriage, since before she was Mrs. Ashworth. The letter. You learn this not from Mrs. Ashworth, who never mentions it again, but from Cook, who knows more than anyone gives her credit for in the roundabout way Cook speaks, was a letter about money. Specifically, it was a letter about money that Mrs. Ashworth has been managing carefully, without her husband's knowledge, for 2 years. A small investment, not large enough to be conspicuous, not small enough to be worthless, made through Mrs. Marsh, whose late husband's connections gave her access to financial arrangements that respectable married women were not supposed to have. The investment has done well. Mr. Ashworth does not know, is not supposed to know. The money, when it is realised, when it is returned, will go through Mrs. Marsh's hands to a form that Mrs. Ashworth can access without it being visible as money. A piece of jewellery, perhaps, or a property arrangement of some kind. In 1823, a married woman's money is her husband's money. This is not a metaphor, this is the law. Upon marriage, a woman's property transfers to her husband, her income, her inheritance, her savings. All of it belongs to him, legally, until the Married Women's Property Act of 1882, which is 59 years away. Mrs. Catherine Ashworth, in 1823, is doing the only thing available to her. She's operating in the invisible economy, the one that exists underneath the real economy, conducted in back passages and through servants, and in a language of fans and flowers and folded cards, because the real economy does not allow her to exist as a financial actor. The packet you carried was the latest communication in an arrangement that has been kept secret for 2 years, through this exact method, through the language, through the silence, through the trust placed in women who can move through rooms unnoticed. You were trusted with part of this. You held it against your ribs for 4 hours, and you feel the weight of that trust settle into you like something permanent. The summer unfolds. June arrives with genuine heat. London heat, which is specific and complicated, a heat that bounces off stone and brick and accumulates in the streets and smells of everything the city contains, which is not a simple smell. The river is low and fragrant in the least pleasant sense. The streets are dry and dusty, and the horse traffic grinds the dust into a fine, pale powder that coats everything at ankle height and above and gets into your lungs. But the mornings are beautiful. Before the heat builds, in the hour after sunrise, London in June smells like bread and dew and something green from the parks that carries across on the cooler air. You run to the market on those mornings faster than you need to, just to be out in it. Mrs. Ashworth's summer social season is dense. Assemblies, card evenings, dinners, morning calls, afternoon rides in the park. She rides. You don't, you're not required to, but you stand at the park gate with the other ladies' maids and watch and wait in a companionable loose group that is, you've realised, its own social network with its own intelligence sharing. Visits to the theatre twice to see a comedy that she laughed at precisely, and a tragedy that she watched with her fan pressed flat to her collarbone, which you now know means this is striking something true. You are learning faster. The vocabulary is expanding, not just fan and flowers and gloves, but the subtler grammar. The way 2 signals in combination mean something different from either one alone. The way the same signal from a woman of 50 means something different from the same signal from a woman of 20. The way regional differences exist. Women who've spent time in France use a slightly different fan vocabulary, borrowed from French parlour culture And women from certain aristocratic circles have their own closed vocabulary that the merely wealthy don't fully share. You are 17 and you are learning a language, and languages are what 17-year-olds are built for. Your brain absorbs it the way your Yorkshire-born body absorbed the rhythms of agricultural seasons, not by memorizing, but by marinating. And then Mary Tanner teaches you something that upends everything else. The embroidery, she says. It's a hot Tuesday afternoon, and you are both in the garden of the Pembroke house again, which has become your regular classroom. The stone bench is warm under you. The smell of the herbs is stronger in the heat. Mint and lavender and something sharp you still haven't identified. Mary is working on a piece of embroidery that has been in her basket for weeks. Green and white as before, abstract vines as before. The embroidery, you say. The needlework in this household, she says carefully, is not entirely decorative. She holds it up so you can see it properly in the afternoon light. What had looked like random vines resolves, when you look carefully, into something more structured. There is a repeating motif, a vine with a leaf pattern, and within that pattern, intervals, gaps in the vine, small blank spaces at irregular distances. What am I looking at, you ask? A record, Mary says, of correspondence. Each space, she points with her needle, is a message received. This one received. She touches a closed loop in the vine. Response sent. She touches a vine that trails off and then resumes. Message received but not safe to respond to. She touches a gap where the vine is interrupted by a different stitch, a cross stitch, almost invisible in the pattern. You stare at it. She's been recording, keeping account, Mary says. There are women in certain households who do this. Not all, not most. But when the correspondence matters enough, when there's a situation that requires keeping track without keeping written records that could be found, the needlework carries it. What does it look like to someone who doesn't know? Decorative embroidery. Mary's tone is patient. A fairly skilled piece of decorative embroidery, which is what it is. The record is inside it, but you'd only know that if you knew to look. You're quiet for a moment, absorbing this. How long has she been doing this? I've been working in this house for 7 years, Mary says. When I arrived, there were 14 completed pieces stored in the top of her wardrobe. The oldest one at the bottom, I believe, dates from about 15 years ago. 15 years! 15 years of a record carried in needlework, stored safely in plain sight. Does Mrs. Pembroke know you know this? You ask carefully. She knows I can read it, Mary says. She taught me, 3 years into my time here, a pause, the way I'm teaching you. Something clicks into place. She taught you because the work can't just live with one person, Mary says simply. If I leave this position, or if anything happens to me, or to Mrs. Pembroke, the record needs someone who can read it. Carry it forward. You think about this, about the women who created this system. Not just the language of fans and flowers, which is social and distributed and passes between many people, but this private archive carried in thread and silk, maintained through a chain of trained women, passed down. How far back does it go, you ask? This kind of record keeping, Mary considers. Mrs. Pembroke told me she learned it from her own mother. Her mother learned it from her aunt. She didn't know beyond that. So, at least 3 generations. At least. Probably more. You look at the embroidery in her hands, at the coded record of correspondence and response and received and not received safely. worked in green and white thread that looks like garden vines. And you feel something that you don't have quite the vocabulary for yet. Something between wonder and grief, and a very specific kind of admiration for the intelligence of it. This system, built by women who needed to say things and couldn't, who found a way to say them anyway, who built a language out of the objects they were given and embedded their entire interior lives in it. And for the work of it, the extraordinary, patient, quiet work. July is hot and strange. The city in the peak of summer has a slightly delirium quality. The heat doesn't break properly at night. You lie in the attic under a single thin sheet and listen to the warm London night and try to breathe through the smell. Your hands are perpetually slightly damp with sweat, which is terrible for handling fine fabric, and you've started wrapping them in thin cotton before doing Mrs. Ashworth's hair in the mornings to absorb the moisture. The social season thins in July. People leave the city, the wealthy ones, off to their country houses or to the seaside. Mrs. Ashworth has been invited to a cousin's house in Berkshire for 3 weeks, which means 3 weeks of different rhythms, different smells, different demands. You go with her, obviously. You are her hands. Where she goes, you go. Berkshire is a shock to your system that you don't fully anticipate. You've been in London for 11 months. You've adapted, thoroughly adapted to the rhythms and scale of the city, and then you step out of the carriage in front of a large country house, and the smell hits you, grass and cattle and real earth and no coal. And something in your chest performs an unexpected thing that might be relief. You didn't know how much you'd been holding until you let some of it go. The country house is large, comfortable, and owned by a Mr. and Mrs. Fairley, who are cousins of Mrs. Ashworth on her mother's side, and who have 3 children under 10, and a management style that is efficient rather than formal. The household here is different, bigger, more relaxed, with dogs in the front hall and muddy boots left on the stair, and a cook who shouts at the kitchen staff but makes excellent food. You spend the evenings in the servants' hall, which is sociable and noisy, and you spend the mornings attending Mrs. Ashworth through country walks and informal visiting and the lighter version of the social life she maintains in London. And in the country, among women who are more relaxed and less on guard, you see the language differently. It is still there. Of course it's still there. The language doesn't stop when you leave the city. But it's softer here, less compressed. A fan signal that in London would be executed with practised economy here is made more slowly, more languidly, because there is no crowd of watchful strangers to hide it from. The communication is still coded, but it's comfortable, like the way you speak to family differently from how you speak to employers, and watching it here, in the easy summer days with the smell of hay and warm grass and the distant sound of the children running in the orchard, you begin to understand something important. The language was not invented purely out of necessity, not only out of the need to say things that couldn't be said. It was also invented out of pleasure. The pleasure of a private thing, the pleasure of a world within a world, the pleasure of a code known only to some, of being inside something rather than outside it, of having a means of connection that belongs specifically to you and to the women who share it with you. There is joy in it, alongside everything else, alongside the constraint and the necessity and the danger of it going wrong. There is a genuine joy. You think about the fan signals, the way 2 women can conduct an entire conversation across a crowded room in the language they share, and the men around them have no idea, and there is something, yes, something small and private, delightful about that. You think about the embroidery. 15 years of coded records stored in a wardrobe looking like decoration. You think about Mrs. Ashworth, wearing white roses and forget-me-nots, carrying her message in the flowers braided into her hair to a room full of people who couldn't read it, saying the unsayable, beautifully. Back in London in August, autumn beginning to announce itself in the cooler mornings and the earlier evenings, you have been a lady's maid for 15 months. You're better at it now in all the technical ways. The hair takes you less time and turns out better. The pressing is cleaner. The organisation of Mrs. Ashworth's wardrobe is more efficient. Your navigation of London is practised and quick, and no longer frightening. But you are also better at it in the ways Mary Tanner was teaching you from the beginning. You can read a room faster now. You clock the signals before you've consciously decided to look. The fan position, the glove status, the flower choices, and you assemble them into a partial picture of what is happening beneath the surface. You're not fluent. You know you're not fluent. There are still things that go past you, signals you're not trained for, regional or class-specific vocabularies you haven't encountered yet. But you are not deaf anymore, and Mrs. Ashworth knows it. This happens gradually. Over the summer and into the autumn, she begins to use you differently. Small things, asking your opinion on which flower she should wear, in the same tone she might ask cook about a menu, telling you, in the morning preparation, which women will be at the afternoon event and something brief about each of them. Not explaining the full context, just enough. She trusts you to fill in the rest, to understand from the signal rather than the explanation. This is what it means to be good at this job. Not just the hands and the hair and the fabric, the whole thing, the complete competence. You feel it one afternoon in October when she is dressing for a particularly difficult dinner. A dinner with someone she's in conflict with, someone whose name you don't know, but whose existence you've inferred from 2 months of watching. A conflict being conducted entirely through the language across shared social gatherings. And she says very simply as you're pinning her hair, "Agnes, what would you wear tonight?" Silence. Your hands still in her hair. "The pale grey," you say, "with the grey gloves, and no flowers tonight." She meets your eyes in the mirror. The pale grey is modest. It's not a statement dress. It's a "we are not in conflict" dress. It's an "I don't acknowledge that there is a conflict" dress. Grey gloves, kept on. I am here under constraint, but managed deliberate. And no flowers, no messages, no communication tonight. No engagement with whatever is being said across the room. Total strategic silence. She looks at you for a moment. "Yes," she says, and you pin the last section of her hair, and you go to the wardrobe for the pale grey, and something has shifted between the two of you in a way that is not about friendship exactly. You're not friends. She is your employer, and you are her maid. The structure is clear, but is about something real, a recognition. She looked at you and you spoke the language back to her, and she understood that you understood. November. The year is turning over. The city has gone into its winter mode. Coal fires burning from early morning, the light going by 4 in the afternoon, the streets wet and dark and smelling of wet stone and coal smoke. Your washing basin freezes in the mornings again, and you break the ice with the heel of your hand and wash your face in the near-freezing water and dress in the dark. But you're not the same person who arrived here 14 months ago. You know things now. You know the weight of a bolt of fine silk, which is different from the weight of a bolt of cotton, which is different from the weight of a bolt of wool, because you've been handling them every day and your hands have learned. You know the smell of the fog coming off the Thames on a November morning, which is its own specific smell, cold and grey and somehow immense. You know, the sixth stair that creaks, and the particular knock that means a delivery from the Pembroke household, and the sound of Mrs. Ashworth's footstep that means she's in a good mood versus the sound that means she needs quiet. And you know the language, not all of it. You'll never know all of it. It's too alive, too constantly evolving, being added to and adjusted and passed between women you'll never meet, in circles you'll never enter, in languages that branch from the central trunk in directions you haven't discovered yet. But you know enough to speak, to listen, to understand what is happening in a room when nothing is being said. In January, Mary Tanner gives you a final lesson, or not final exactly. Nothing is final in a language that keeps growing. But final for this year, the lesson that closes what she began. She teaches you something she's never mentioned before. It's not fan vocabulary or flower meanings or glove signals or embroidery coding. It's silence itself. Silence, she says, is the most complex vocabulary in the language and the most misread. You're in the Pembroke garden again. January, so it's cold, really cold. Your breath is visible. The garden is frosted and bare. But Mary sits on the bench as if this is the right place for this lesson, and so you sit there too, your hands tucked into your shawl. Silence can mean agreement, she says. Silence can mean disagreement too strongly felt to express. Silence can mean, I have heard you, and am pretending I have not. Silence can mean, I am frightened. Silence can mean, I know more than you realize, and I'm choosing not to reveal how much. She looks at the bare garden. Women in this world are taught from birth that their job is to be quiet, that their silence is appropriate. That silence is a virtue. She pauses. And so they've learned to fill it with everything they actually mean. The frost on the garden wall catches the thin January light. Your fingers are cold inside your shawl. Is that what the whole language is, you ask? What do you fill silence with when you're not allowed to speak? Partly, Mary considers, but also, and this is the thing I want you to understand, it's what you fill silence with when you choose not to speak. When speaking would put you or someone you care about in danger. When the cost of words is too high, a pause. The women who built this system, and it was built, Agnes, by real women in real situations who needed it. They weren't just making the best of a bad situation. They were creating something. A whole infrastructure of communication, invisible to the people who tried to silence them. She picks up the embroidery that's always in her lap. That's not helplessness. That's intelligence. She begins to stitch. You watch the needle go in and out of the fabric, white and green thread, the vine pattern, the gaps that record messages, the closed loops that record responses. You think about the women down that vine, back through Mary, through Mrs. Pembroke, through Mrs. Pembroke's mother, through the unnamed women before that. Back through the years, through generations of women sitting in rooms they were not the masters of, wearing their messages in their flowers and their fans and their gloves and their silence. All of it alive, all of it continuing. You'll pass this on, Mary says. It's not a question. Yes, you say. The frost in the garden catches the light. Somewhere beyond the garden wall, London goes about its morning. The sound of it is constant and dense. Horses and carts and voices and bells. But here, in this small, cold January garden, there is a specific held quality to the quiet. Two women on a stone bench, their breath visible, one of them stitching, saying things in the silence between them. That spring Mrs. Ashworth's situation resolves. You don't know the details. You aren't meant to know the details. What you know is assembled from small things over several weeks. A change in the quality of Mrs. Ashworth's mornings, something lighter in it, her less wound. A reduction in the back passage deliveries. A conversation you're not supposed to hear between Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth that ends for once with both voices relaxed. And then, one Thursday morning, Mrs. Ashworth comes into the dressing room and stands at the window for a moment before sitting, which is not her habit. She stands and looks at the back garden, the small London garden with its apple tree putting out new blossom, white and perfect in the April light. Then she sits. "Agnes," she says, while you begin her hair, "I want to give you something." She opens the drawer of the dressing table and takes out a small silk purse, which she sets in front of the mirror. "You've been in this position for 18 months, she says, "and you've done more than the position requires. You don't know what to say to this. Take it," she says simply. "It's not much, but it's yours." The purse, when you open it later, contains £4, which is, you do the calculation, you've gotten better at calculations, almost 5 weeks' wages. More money than you've held in your hand since arriving in London. You hold it and you feel the weight of it, and you think about what it represents. Not just the money, though the money is real and welcome and important, but the acknowledgement, the recognition from a woman who has learned to communicate in the spaces between words that you were there, that you were paying attention, that you understood. £4 in a silk purse, which is a language too. I see you. You did something that mattered. You were trusted and you held the trust. The year closes in on itself. Autumn comes again, and then winter, and then the first hints of a second spring. You are learning still. You will always be learning, Mary told you so, and you believe her now in a way you didn't at the beginning. The language is not a thing you learn and know. It's a thing you practice, a thing you listen for, a thing that changes and grows. You've taught the new housemaid one piece of it. Just one. The fan at half open in the left hand and what it means. She's 14 from somewhere in Hertfordshire, and she looked at you with the expression you recognise from your own first lessons. The expression of someone seeing a door they didn't know existed. "Why do they have to talk like that?" she asked. "Why not just say it?" "Because they can't," you said. "And then because you've learned to be accurate. Or because saying it would cost more than they're willing to pay, so they say it this way instead." The girl thought about this. "That's sad," she said. "Yes," you said. "And also something else." You didn't finish that sentence. You let her sit with it, the way Mary always let you sit with the incomplete things until they completed themselves. On a night in late February, with the last of winter still pressing on the city, cold and wet and coal-smelling and dense, you're in the attic room after a long day lying on the straw mattress with the thin blanket pulled up, and you are so tired that every part of you aches with it. Your hands ache from pressing and folding. Your feet ache from standing. The small of your back aches from the particular posture of someone who spends hours attending to another person's body. Good aches, useful aches, the aches of someone who worked. The sounds of Gracechurch Street come up through the floorboards. A cart, distant voices, the church bell, St. Edmund the King with its flat note, marking the hours. You think about the women of the language, all of them, back through time, further than you can see. In drawing rooms and gardens and church pews and back passages and ballrooms and morning call parlours, across cities you've never visited, in countries where the specific vocabulary is different, but the deep grammar is the same. All the things said without speaking, all the things communicated in a fan's angle, a flower's colour, a glove dropped just so, a card's corner carefully folded. All the needs and warnings and declarations and refusals and loves and fears wrapped in silk and thread and sent across a room in a silence that only some people could hear. And the women who maintained it, who passed it down, generations of women teaching the women who came after them, this is what they gave you, not just the language, the capacity to be inside a room and hear it, to stand in a space full of communication you were previously deaf to and suddenly receive it. You think about what Mary said. We are their hands when their hands can't be seen to move. And you think about what that means forward, not just for you, in this position, in this household, in this city, but what it has meant and what it means and what it will mean. Because languages don't die when the necessity for them changes. They transform. They find new forms. The specific vocabulary of fans and flowers is already, even now, in 1824, beginning to formalise, beginning to be written down in parlour books and ladies' magazines as charming novelty. In 50 years it will be a published dictionary. In 150 years it will be a historical curiosity, a footnote in books about Victorian courtship, but the grammar will survive. The deep grammar, the need to say the thing in the space between the words, to communicate in the invisible register, to encode the real meaning in what appears to be surface, that will survive because the need for it will survive. Centuries will pass. The specific fans and the specific flowers will change. The silk and the ivory sticks will become something else. The language will move into new objects, new gestures, new codes. But women will still need to say things they can't say aloud. And they will find ways. They always find ways. They have always found ways. That doesn't change. The intelligence of the quiet, the craft of the invisible, the patience required to build a language from the objects you're allowed to hold, none of that changes. Some things don't change. Your eyes are heavy. The candle on the windowsill is burning low. The flame shrunk to a small blue core that casts almost no light. The room is close and cold and entirely familiar, every surface and angle of it known to your body in the dark. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Wednesday means the market, and Mrs. Ashworth has an afternoon call to make, and you need to press the afternoon dress, and cook mentioned that the lavender water is running low, and you should pick up more if the apothecary on Fenchurch Street has it in stock. Wednesday is ordinary. Wednesday is the unexceptional grain of regular life, the texture that most of life is made of, the hours between the significant moments. You've learned to value Wednesday, to find the particular comfort of ordinary days. Tomorrow there will be fabric to press and hair to dress, and streets to navigate and small negotiations in the market over the cost of lavender water and all the thousand small transactions of a regular day in a regular city where nothing especially remarkable happens. But tonight there is this, the attic room, the known darkness, the city continuing beneath you. Your hands ache, your feet ache. You are warm enough, full enough, safe enough. You think for a moment about the girl from Yorkshire who stood in this same city 18 months ago and understood nothing of what was happening around her, who stood in rooms full of conversation and heard only the surface, who walked past 100 coded messages a day and saw only decoration, only gesture, only noise. She's still in you somewhere, the not knowing version, the before. But she's quieter now, less afraid, less lost. You know things. You know that a woman with a half-open fan held in her left hand has something urgent to tell you in private. You know that white roses mean a secret kept and rosemary means loyalty maintained. You know that a glove dropped cleanly, no fumble, is an invitation. You know that silence is a vocabulary with more words in it than any spoken language. You know that there has always been, underneath the world you can see, a world you have to learn how to see, and that the learning never stops. Let it come then. Let the sleep reach you the way it always reaches you at the end of a long day, not suddenly but slowly, pulling gently, the way water finds the low places. Let the sounds of London, which you know now the way you know your own breathing, settle into background and then further back than background, into something that is not quite heard. Let the cold of the room become irrelevant. Let the ache in your hands soften and recede. Let the names and the flowers and the signals and the folds begin to blur at the edges, soft and warm like embroidery seen from a distance. I am here. I have not forgotten. I am silent, but I am here. That's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. The candle on the windowsill goes out. Saint Edmund the King strikes, the late hour in its flat-noted voice, and the sound reaches you at the edge of sleep, and you're too far gone to count the strokes, and it doesn't matter, and the world is dark and warm and quiet and full of the things said in silence, full of the things carried in hands that move when no one is watching, full of the women who learned and the women who taught and the women who are learning still, somewhere right now, in some equivalent of a cold stone bench in a January garden, hearing the vocabulary of a language that lives in the spaces between the words. You've earned this rest. You've earned this particular darkness. Take it. Sleep. Good night.